Welcome to Crossing the Line, where we dig into the latest news on the economy, housing, and anything else that's really upsetting me, since very little seems to make me happy these days, Ray, especially when the Jets are as terrible as they are. Today is November 20th, and it's our third episode, Hannah. We didn't get a cake or anything, and we still don't have our mugs yet. So this, for those of you watching on YouTube, this will be our last episode plugging Vince's podcast with his coffee mug. So
I can't say I was expecting a cake, but at the very least, maybe a coffee mug.
Next week we're going to have our stuff. We're up on the screen. We have our logo up on the screen in this beautiful Studio 1873 here, which again is conveniently located right outside my office.
Correct.
Just awesome for an old man like me. It's great to take 4 steps and be in the studio.
You got to get your steps in for the day.
That's about it. Yeah, that's about it. For those of you who don't know, I'm Greg Heym, Chief Economist here at Brown Harris Stevens and author of everybody's favorite weekly blog, The Line, where we have over 2,500 subscribers who are still subscribing, so that's good. We have Hannah, Ray, and Lena here as always. The gang's here. Let's see how much trouble we can get into. Again, our goal here is always to be informative, concise, entertaining, and edgy all at the same time. You know, I yell at the Fed that they should just do one thing at a time and not a whole bunch. And here I am trying to do like a whole bunch of things. You think I can do better than the Fed?
Can you ask me that later?
No, you better say yes. Well, we'll see if we can pull that off. We have a couple of new things to announce. One, we have an email address set up now for your questions, comments. If it's something negative, just send it directly to Hannah. If it's something positive, send it to ctl@bhsusa.com. That's ctl@bhsusa.com. We love your feedback, and we'll answer your questions. You know, maybe we'll bring you in.
Maybe we should expect fan mail.
Well, my mother doesn't know how to email that much, but we'll see. You never know. And for those of you, again, on YouTube, sorry for those not watching the video, you may have wondered what this mixer has been in front of Hannah the first 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But we're actually going to use it now, and there are sound effects there. So we'll see if Hannah uses this too much or too little. And
there's a lot of gadgets going on here.
There's a lot of, it's like DJ Hannah. You have to come up with a DJ name now because, now you have to.
I can't.
Well,
okay.
Then we'll assign one to you. But I don't know what sound effects she's going to press, but apparently there are 2 banks of sound effects. And it's like, why do you need 2 in case one goes under? One of the banks goes under,
Good one.
It's got to start with the negative. Save that for the Jets, okay? They couldn't even convert a 3rd down yesterday. It's just killing me. All right, we're going to try to get the economic stuff out of the way in 15 minutes, and then we're going to hit some random topics that I think you're going to enjoy. Let's start with the big news of last week, which was inflation lower than expected in October, and that's exactly what we were hoping for. We had a good change in mortgage rates where they actually went down for 2 weeks after 7 straight increases, and we said last week that we're really hoping to get a good inflation report, and that would do a lot more to bring rates down, and that's exactly what we got. Inflation, as measured by the Consumer Price Index, was unchanged in October and just 3.2% higher than a year ago. Both those figures were better than expected. Let's dig into that a little bit, and because sometimes you have to look into the specifics of the report to really understand what's going on. The main reason that prices were flat last month was that there was a significant decline in energy prices. And energy prices, like food prices, can move very quickly up or down in any given month. And that's why we look at the headline number because it's the headline number. It's like when we do a Manhattan market report, everybody wants to know the overall average price, but then they want to go to what's specifically impacting their home. So the next step is to look at core inflation. Core inflation strips out food and energy prices because, again, they can jump up and down significantly in any given month. And core inflation has been running higher than the headline number. So it was up 0.2% last month and 4% year over year. Now, those were pretty much in line with expectations. The reason it's concerning that core inflation is running higher is because it takes longer to come down. And what really makes up the bulk of core inflation is housing. And one of the things that we know right now is that whether you're buying or renting, housing is very expensive right now. And even with sky-high mortgage rates, the prices of houses are not coming down because supply is so low. And leave it to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, my former employer, a long time ago, 30 years ago, that they use something called owner's equivalent rent to measure housing inflation, which is basically asking a homeowner, what would your house rent for? So that's the concern. The good news on core inflation is the 4% year-over-year increase was the lowest annual increase since September of 21. That's what, let's make sure you don't use up all the applause for stuff like that. Maybe when I say fun things, you can use the applause.
Yeah, we'll see.
I'll never run out of
gotta
applause
look
for you, Greg.
Thanks.
Never.
Right. You get a raise. What's that song? Nothing from nothing leaves nothing. So the other thing we look at in this inflation report is real earnings. That's basically wages adjusted for inflation. And they aren't up much, just 0.2% last month and a little under 1% year over year. But that is still good news because it seemed like forever prices were rising faster than wages. So even though people were getting 4 to 5% increases in pay year over year, prices were rising faster than that, which is basically lowering their purchasing power. So the fact that it's flipped around is good news, and hopefully that will continue. We also got really good news on the producer price index, which was even better news than consumer prices. Obviously, the CPI gets more of the attention because what consumers, purchase is over 2/3 of the gross domestic product. So what they're paying for those goods and services are always something we look at. The stock market loved it. The S&P 500 was up almost 2% the day the CPI data came out, and November is looking really good so far, and it ain't even over yet. So,
Very true.
As I said before, markets are either way too happy or way too pessimistic. There's no, as my son would say, mid with stock markets. Go ahead, hit the boo. We'll have to get my son doing something like that. You're booing my son, Hannah. He's going to cry
I'm not
right now
booing
when he
Gregory.
listens to this. Yeah, sure. So, the reason the stock market is so happy really is because they think that now that inflation is really showing signs of real cooling, that this is it. The Fed is not going to hike one more time. And, it seems like this is our third episode, and it seems like all we've talked about is the Fed or a
You
significant
love
part.
them secretly.
I do not. But, the question is this. The Fed's target annual rate of inflation is 2%, and they look at something called a core PCE, Personal Consumption Expenditures Index. So let's look at core inflation here. It's running 4% year over year. Their goal is 2%. So it's running twice the level that that they're aiming for. So are they that confident that they've done enough and just can go to sleep and hope everything's okay in the morning? I don't know. It's a good question. The weight of the inflation over the last 2 years in particular is killing the American consumer. It's killing the housing market. And you have to get rid of this. It's like an infection. The doctor gives you the antibiotics and he says, Ray, you got to take the whole prescription. Don't stop. If the redness goes away, you got to take the whole thing or it's going to come back. And I think that's the issue here. Have you taken all your medicine, Hannah, or is there more still in the bottle that you have to finish, even though you don't want to, because we all know what antibiotics do to your stomach. So and even last week, Jerome Powell came out and admitted that he's, quote, not confident they've done enough on inflation yet, and their last economic projections in September show that they were expecting to hike rates one more time, and for some reason they haven't done it the last couple of meetings. So let's see. I mean, it's something to watch. Is this CPI report going to change Jerome Powell and the Fed's mind? We'll find out soon enough. Soon enough. But I don't think it should. They need to hike one more time and be done with it. So this led to, you take a weaker than expected jobs report a couple of weeks ago, and then you have lower than expected inflation, you mix it up and you get lower mortgage rates. And that's a good thing. That's what we care about so much here since we all work for a real estate company. So the 30-year conforming mortgage rate fell to 7.44% last week. That is the third consecutive weekly decline. We now have seen a decline of 35 bips, as you Wall Streeters might say, or as the rest of people go, 0.35% in mortgage rates since October. And that's good news. That's what we need. We'd like it to be down more, but we'll take the steady decline. It's true that a year ago rates were averaging about 6.6%. But again, learn to appreciate the improvement. Now, if I saw improvement in the Jets, I might appreciate it, but they took a big step backwards. I got to stop. It's all about the Rangers. It's all about the Rangers.
That's all you have left.
And the Yankees. And again, Ron Kidry's here with us as always. Get Juan Soto.
How are they doing this year?
The Rangers, they are in first place.
Yes, they are.
And they just beat your Devils.
You're absolutely right, Greg.
Thank you, Jessica Chastain. It's an old soundbite of her on SNL. We're going to use that one a lot, and just make it louder, okay?
We're going to use it as needed.
It's you're going to wear it out from using it too much because I'm just right all the time. As we've said before, the day of 3% mortgages, they might come back at some point, but the Jets will probably have to win the Super Bowl before they come back. That's how long it may take for that to happen. But let's just enjoy that they're moving in the right direction. And as we like to point out, not only does this present an opportunity for home buyers out there, as the home they were looking at has become a lot more affordable the last couple of weeks, but it's also important for sellers because there's going to be more people out looking now. They're reading, they're seeing rates have come down. Their real estate agents, who I'm sure are all over it, are pointing out, hey, the payment's going to be this much lower now. Let's go look. So if you're a seller, you want to do things to get more eyes on your listing, advertise more, think about a price adjustment, whatever it takes. This is an opportunity to start negotiating. So let's get it done and sell some people homes that they desperately want or need to buy. I'm all for that. And then we can keep our jobs here, which
That'd
is
be
nice. Yeah, for now, yes. No, it'd be lovely. What would we do if we couldn't do this podcast too? Whatever we were doing before at this time.
That is a good question. I don't know what I would do without this podcast.
Well, I just go on to doing whatever I do Monday morning, which is just a bunch of reports and lament about how much the Jets stink. So in our final big economic headline last week, we always talk about how sometimes bad news is good news. So we found out that retail sales fell 0.1% in October. Now, normally that'd be nothing to throw a party about, but that was better than expected. We were looking for a 0.3% decline. And the reason we're happy that it's only 0.1% is that, again, we've been talking about how consumers have really felt the pain. And even though the rate prices are going up has come down, because people forget that inflation means prices are going up. So lower inflation still means prices are going up. They're just not going up as fast as they used to. And, retail sales are not adjusted for inflation. So you can see that it fell 0.1%. Inflation was flat. So, these numbers have been kind of skewed by inflation, and that spending has not been keeping up with inflation. And now you see that here as well. So it's concerning from a point of what happens in the next couple of months. But you have to remember that this data has been much better than expected the past couple of months. It's the first monthly decline since March. Remember, we had that phenomenal GDP report for the third quarter. So that's the positive side. Hey, we took a step back. When you're comparing month to month, if you have a couple great months, eventually you expect a pullback. The real question is, with the high inflation over the past 2 years, we have record credit card debt at record high credit card rates. And you have the restart of student loan payments. Can the consumer who's
the bane of my existence?
Well,
student debt.
Well, did you get a valuable education?
I did.
Well, there you
I'd
go.
like to think so,
You can't put a price on learning. Yeah,
All
you
right.
can. You can. Apparently, it's a very big price.
Yeah.
I don't. Luckily, I'm so old. I don't have to think about that. Although my son is a junior in high school, so.
I'll get out of these trenches 1 decade in the future.
Well, who knows? We may just become the most popular podcast in the world, and then we'll have Pat McAfee money, and I can just start wearing muscle T-shirts, and we could have Aaron Rodgers on the show.
That'd be great.
Unfortunately, we're more likely to one up like John McAfee, the founder of the
Dream big. Dream big.
Dream on.
Yeah. Great song.
Any New York sports fan certainly knows what that means. So we'll see if we keep seeing consumer spending. We expect economic growth to slow in the fourth quarter and into next year, just because there's no way it could keep running that hot. Again, the weight of all that's been thrown at the consumer, higher mortgage rates, higher credit card rates, higher prices for everything. At some point, they have to cry uncle. The question that we have to get an answer to is, will the Fed get that soft landing they've been looking for so desperately, where it's the Goldilocks. It's just enough to break the back of inflation, but not enough to send us into recession. So that's the economic news of the week. I think we were under 15 minutes on that because, see, Lena's giving me the thumbs up. That's certainly.
There we go. It's worth the applause.
Sure, why not? Well, now we're going to have Hannah. I keep getting emails, more Hannah on the show. I take that personally.
Can't be true. Is it?
No, and they're from my family. That's the funny part of the thing. I thought it would have been your family emailing me, but no, my family's like, less you, more Hannah.
You did provide the email address at the beginning of this show, so more to come.
CTL@bhsusa.com. So we're going to have Hannah read us some interesting news story, and then we're going to opine on them and see how much trouble we can get ourselves into. What do we got first?
All right, let's do it. According to CNBC, tipping attitudes are changing. It once rewarded good service. Now they're saying that it is a determining factor of how customers are treated. So what does this mean? There's a difference now in tipping at a sit-down restaurant and when you go get your coffee in the morning. You go up, you order your coffee, they turn the iPad around, and what do you see? A screen.
And it's always
tips.
a very high suggested tip.
Right. I just got a coffee about 3 days ago, and the tip was more than the coffee itself.
You're just a giving, wonderful human being, Hannah. What can I say?
It's difficult. But in the story, they said that 3/4 of Americans say that the quality of the service they receive determines the tip. And I think that that's also interesting because not many people feel that way. Sometimes people default and tip 15, 20, 25%, and others contemplate the amount of tip. Do you do this?
Well, this has brought on this new concept of tip fatigue, right?
Correct.
We're just tired of this everywhere we go. And I think there's a couple of things that go into this. One, nobody's saying that people that work in restaurants or coffee stands or wherever, people that work in the food service industry work hard and deserve to be compensated fairly. Nobody's saying that. But the problem for the average American is we're just talking about the price increases over the past 2 years. Everything has become more expensive. And now all kinds of restaurants and coffee shops are now charging you 3 to 5% more if you use your credit card. And then you're supposed to tip 15, 20% on top of that. It's become a lot more difficult for the average person to go out. Now, here in New York City at night, restaurants are very crowded, but there is a fatigue aspect to it too, that you feel everywhere you go, they're going to know. They turn the screen around and then they're going to know. And it's like, wow, is my sandwich going to be okay next time?
You also have Uber Eats, DoorDash. There are a lot of other delivery services that you'll also tip, and it's not cheap. It's not cheap, but I do appreciate. I rarely use Uber Eats, but when I do, I always feel terrible. I end up canceling it and going in the car and getting it myself.
I have a rule that I have to leave my office for
Right.
lunch because sometimes you don't realize a couple hours have gone by. I'm one of those people that I will tip less if the service gets to the point where it ruins my meal. if food came out a little late, it was still good, I liked it. Okay, that's fine. But I like anybody else, I've had instances where I've left very small tips. Even had a waitress throw a tip back at me when her incompetence completely ruined a very expensive meal. So I tip very generous. I do think that we have we want good service and we're happy to pay for it when we can. But I think the industry has to realize that people are hurting just like they're hurting, and to tip 20% on top of the increase in the prices at the restaurant, on top of the credit card surcharge that they're going to have to pay for, is a lot. And what really gets me is when you're at a game. You're in Madison Square Garden where the beers are like $20, and then it swings around. And, all of a sudden a 10% tip on a beer is expensive.
Which is, by the way, it's also the world's largest beer that goes flat unless you're,
if
shotgunning.
Slow. Well, my younger days.
Slamming them? You gotta enjoy
the score of the game. I don't know. I think. Well, this just begs one question. My sister-in-law worked in restaurants for years, and she used to yell at me all the time about this. I mean, for the money I pay, if I call up the local diner and order, food, and I go get it myself, for the amount I pay, shouldn't they have to at least hand me the food? I know there was prep work. I know someone had to check the order, and I usually add a couple of bucks. But I think that's the part I haven't figured out yet. I should give them a little bit, but it's not going to be 20%. They didn't go up and get me extra drinks or.
Right. I think that, and this also goes into another question that I had working a service industry job. I've worked at coffee shops. I've been a waitress before. The value in a cash tip, especially in coffee shops and cafes and things like that, it was much more valuable because you physically see that at the end of your shift. And I think that I always had negative feelings towards working at a coffee shop and then, sometimes never seeing the tip. So, I always like to tip in cash if there's a little jar there. But, to quote the late and great Anthony Bourdain, loosely, there's no job quite as humbling as working a service industry job. So I come at it from an empathy standpoint where you might be having a bad day.
So you're painting yourself as the empathetic one, and I'm just the guy who doesn't care. Is that how this works? Ray.
You're absolutely right, Greg.
Oh, well, thanks for that. No, I think we all sympathize with the plight, and it feels bad too if I get a drink and I throw the change in the jar. They're going to be mad at me because it's change. Because most people don't even want change. Like, what are these coins? I don't.
I think every little bit counts.
Okay.
Towards something.
As long as they don't give me the evil eye. But you can go to any of the restaurants I go to. I tip very well. As long as the service is good, even if it's not great. Again, just don't get to the point where I'm mad I went to that restaurant. Things happen, and I understand that, and they work hard either way.
If I'm fed, it's really hard to upset me.
Why do you tell me that before? You got to tell me that before the podcast so we can feed you, so you're not hitting those wrong buttons with the booze in them and everything.
No, I'll still hit them. Well, that brings me to my next point. According to Yahoo Finance, Wall Street investment bankers, their bonuses are going to shrink. They should expect to shrink 15 to 25%. Well,
these are people we're not going to feel so sympathetic for.
Right.
But
I guess you're right.
Wall Streeters make a lot of money. I have some interesting, of course, you knew with this topic on the list that I was going to come up with some interesting statistics. But a couple things to remember. Investment bankers, that's only one sector of the securities industry. They're not everybody. But most areas in securities industry are expected to have flat or declining bonuses for 2023. Although wealth management bonuses are expected to rise 5%. So that's what everybody should go into. But let's keep it simple. Last year, 2022 bonuses were $33.7 billion. That's billion with a B. It's huge. So even if all Wall Street bonuses were down 20%, that would be $27 billion. That would be more than bonuses were from 2014 to 2016. Now, we had a record in 21 of over $40 billion. So while it seems like, oh my God, these things are going down, this is still would be a historically high number. And the one thing I can tell you, there's more than one thing I can tell you. Every year we hear this, bonuses are going to be down, but there's going to be no bonuses. It's going to be terrible. Everybody's going to get laid off. And Wall Street does restructure. They look at who's making the money and who's not, and they make significant cuts to staff in certain areas. Happens every year. Every year a lot is made about it, and every year it's a lot about nothing. And one thing I noticed too, the state controller who gives us the estimate of these bonuses, they take it from tax returns and withholdings. They're always revising the prior year numbers higher. So we'll see what happens, but this doesn't scare me all that much. But let's talk about Wall Street's importance to the state and the city. Wall Street alone counts for 22% of New York State's tax revenue because New York State counts heavily on income tax. And boy, do they make a lot of income. It's only 8% of New York City tax revenue. And the reason it's not as important is almost half of New York City's tax revenue comes from property taxes. And that's good for New York City because that's a very stable, reliable source of income. 1 in 11 jobs in New York City is either directly or indirectly associated with the securities industry. There used to be this number people throw out. I always thought it was some kind of guesstimate that every one Wall Street job supports 2 or 3 other jobs in the area. You think they go out to eat. I'm sure they tip. They better tip well.
Yeah.
They buy suits. They buy expensive stuff. But again, Wall Street is only 4% of the employment in New York City. Yet they account for 16% of all the economic activity that goes on here. So while we're not as reliant on Wall Street, obviously there's been some other fields, most notably tech. That is, Google has a large presence here. Even after we screwed up the Amazon deal, they still have a decent presence here. And I think a lot of that has to do with our fine universities that have also been expanding. That has helped diversify the city's economy, which makes it a lot less reliant on Wall Street than it used to be. But we still love them and we still want them to make money. You do.
I guess.
We'd like some of that money, but they'll buy apartments and then
I think, that's
we'll be able to buy more mugs once they come.
An abundance of crossing the line mugs forever. Well, I don't know if you've heard of this, Greg, but a lot of real estate agents are rethinking their career path.
Yes. And they were probably doing it before the NAR lawsuit. And obviously there's been more lawsuits announced, including one here in New York City, where we record in Studio 1873 each week.
The greatest
studio. Because you think about the environment, it was gangbusters right after COVID. In most parts of the U.S., we saw unprecedented, record activity. And now there are very few homes for sale. So in some areas, like we always joke about Palm Beach, there's more agents than actual homes in Palm Beach. So as listings, you look at our offices in Connecticut, like they can tell you by name, address the listings that are out there. They don't have to look it up. There's so few. So you have more brokers fighting for a lot less listings. So that's going to, make people rethink that. And now you look at the threat to their commissions.
Right.
And what a buyer's broker is going to get paid, because especially if you're starting out, you're not really going to get listings like the more experienced brokers that have a bigger sphere of influence and, have better connections and have sold homes to many people who then call them when they want to sell them themselves. So I think when it used to expect maybe you'd get 2.5%, 3%, half the commission, now those expectations are going down since it has to be here in New York. REBNY starting January 1st, you'll have to list separate, commissions for sellers and buyers brokers. So it'll help inform home sellers who's getting what, and they're free to negotiate all of that. But it is going to discourage people who just immediately think that this is not just going to lower their commissions, but also lower prices.
Well, I found it interesting how some are considering a flat fee structure, which, you'd have a flat rate that you would charge, which would, kind of be a contract agreement of service and expenses and transportation, time spent looking for a house.
The old expression, you get what you pay for, or you don't get what you don't pay for. I'm not saying that, everybody should just make the same amount of money, but think about how complicated some deals are. Like buying in a co-op is an incredibly, especially in Manhattan, is a very complicated thing. There's this whole board approval process. There are all these rules you have to deal with, all this documentation you have to provide. You don't have to worry about the bank approving your loan. You have to worry about the board approving you. And somebody who is selling a co-op has to put a lot of work, or any apartment or home anywhere. Photos have to be taken. You have to advertise the listings. The hours that you put in hosting open houses, reaching out to the brokerage community, doing videos. It's a lot of work, and there's no guarantee for payment. So, Look, people have tried the flat fee or very low fee model. It hasn't proved very successful. I think hopefully what will come out of all this is better informed sellers and buyers, not just because they'll know exactly who's getting paid what, but they'll also maybe have a better understanding, and we talked about this 2 weeks ago, about what the brokers are doing for them. People say, what are you doing for money? Well, you saw that it was in the New York Times this week or wherever it was published. We had 3 open houses. We had it featured on this website. All the stuff, we did a video, went on social media, 100 people saw it or turned it, whatever. And again, there's no guarantee. If it doesn't sell, they don't get paid. And if you're working with a buyer and the buyer says, you know what, I'm going to stay where I am, you've put in a lot of hours in, you've done a lot of showings. So I think hopefully everybody will have a better understanding of where everybody's coming at. And we'll see what happens with these lawsuits. Remember, this is going to be years of appeals and going up to higher and higher courts. So we'll see what ultimately happens. But yeah, I think it's a combination of hearing about these decisions was what probably pushed people that were on the fence about their careers into really thinking about trying something else, especially when, again, there's over 9.5 million open jobs out there. So we hate to lose, good real estate brokers. But
well, do you think we have time for one more?
Sure. The clock says 0, so we have endless time now.
Well, to end on a semi-negative note, well, it's actually pretty negative. Mayor Adams just announced a $4 billion budget cut in New York City, and this affects the plans to hire new police officers. It affects the FDNY. Personally, it'll affect me because public libraries will be closed on Sunday. I love the New York Public Library. Closed on Sunday, that's a terrible thing to me.
Well, it's very hard. Obviously, the migrant crisis is costing the city a fortune that they did not plan for. And without any additional help from the federal government, which has not come along yet, that money has to come from somewhere. And unlike the federal government, who doesn't have to balance their budgets, they can just run huge deficits and just sell more treasury securities. The city has to balance its budget. So when you have what they call a gap, which is when your revenues don't match your expenditures, you have to cut. Or you could raise taxes, but we're already very highly taxed here in New York City. So I think right away when you hear about stopping the hiring of more police, that's going to scare everybody because crime is a serious issue here. We talked about the shoplifting task force.
Right.
We laugh at it, but there's a danger involved in it. If anybody tries to stop what's going on, people can get hurt. I think that's the last thing we want to hear. And we haven't had this few police officers in several decades, and that's also concerning because the city was incredibly safe. This goes back to something when I used to work for Rebney a long time ago. The president of Rebney at the time, Steve Spinola, used to always say about Rudy Giuliani, he proved that the city was manageable. Because what happened in the 70s and the 80s was the city payroll became too huge and the mismanagement was terrible. The city almost went broke in the 70s. The 80s, we had issues with crime and drugs and other things. I think that when you're talking about the size of New York City and the budget, there's a lot of room to cut, and none of it's popular. And they're in here are across the board cuts, and not just one go round about it. So, some of it, again, the police, the libraries, I don't know. We'll see how upset people are. Look, if you have a kid, that's the perfect place to spend a weekend afternoon. You take
Education is also going to have over $1 billion cut from.
Well, and some of that's going to come from their safety officers, and
right.
They've asked parents to step in.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
we'll see.
Look, it's tough. It's tough times, but the city, it's not necessarily a revenue problem because again, the majority of their tax revenue, almost the majority, comes from property taxes, which seem to go up every year, except during the pandemic, and is pretty reliable for the city. And with all the talk of everybody leaving. Actually, the net migration last year was positive in New York City. So or at least in Manhattan, I think it's hard. Anybody who runs a city or a state or a country has hard decisions to make. Everybody's going to be upset about something. Nobody's happy when you cut budgets. But I guess my question is, well, we know what the real cause of this is, and I would hope that could be addressed. It doesn't seem that the mayor and the president have a great relationship on this because they can't seem to get together. So let's hope that the city can come to some sort of agreement and get some kind of help with this crisis because it is costing a fortune that was not planned for, and we don't want to see the police force reduced to a level where crime is already an issue on everybody's mind all the time these days, and we want to keep the city safe, and we don't want people leaving, and we don't want businesses leaving. We want them to keep coming here, and we've also seen a very good return of tourism in New York City. It fuels the economy.
Yep, it's the perfect time for it.
It's it's great, especially the international visitors who spend a lot more money here. Subways are busier.
Yes, they are.
We don't want to put that at risk by not having enough police around, and let's hope they get it worked out soon.
We'll have to see.
Well, we will be very thankful if they do, which leads to our closing. We want to wish everybody out there a happy Thanksgiving.
Yes.
In many ways, a lot of people's favorite holiday.
It's my favorite holiday for sure.
Oh, yeah. What's your favorite dish to eat on other than turkey?
I mean, is dessert included? Because I make a great apple pie.
I wouldn't know. Ray, have you had? There's no pies around here, right, Lena? We haven't had any Hannah pies. No?
I mean, we'll see. It's a lot of work, guys. But
this might have been how Mrs. Fields got started. Made some cookies, and the next thing you know, you got a business.
We're gonna have to look into that. Yeah, Crossing the Line Pie Company. I mean, it's promising, but I'd probably have to say no to that. But to answer your question, my favorite dish would have to be sweet potatoes. My mom makes them really good.
It's funny you mentioned sweet potatoes because
is it funny?
I used to take these videos of my son. Maybe we should put this on and really embarrass him once. And one of the famous ones
Greg.
when he was first eating was we were feeding him sweet potatoes. And every time we put it in his mouth, he'd chew it and then start crying hysterically. And then every time we said sweet potato after that, he would cry. Exactly. And to this day, my son hates sweet potato. I don't really care for them either, but I like
marshmallows on top. It's so good.
But then does that take away from the healthiness of eating the sweet potatoes?
Who wants to be healthy on Thanksgiving?
Why don't you just wrap it in bacon like they do everything else that people won't eat? You just wrap it in bacon and it works. I'm a big stuffing guy. You don't get stuffing any other time of the year, it seems, other than Thanksgiving. Ray, what are you looking forward to?
Vegan turkey.
Vegan turkey.
Ooh.
All right, that's something. Lena, you got a favorite dish?
I'm making lasagna.
Nothing wrong with that.
That sounds great.
It's the perfect meal.
I have an Italian house.
Well, I'm half Sicilian, and we used to go to my great aunt's house and uncle's house on Thanksgiving. And by the time we got done with the pasta, there was no room for turkey, none. And we never complained about it. But it's a great holiday. It's hopefully everybody would be with family.
Yes.
The Jets don't play till Friday, so they won't ruin Thanksgiving. So it's been great. working with everybody again this week. I think we'll have the mugs next week, and we'll celebrate that. Again, enjoy the holiday, enjoy the weekend, and thanks for crossing the line with us. Wait, we didn't necessarily have a rant of the week, but the Jets.
When are you not ranting, though?
I haven't foamed at the mouth yet. Anyhow, have a great week, everybody.